Welcome to Trustee Talk. I'm Dick Murgatroyd, and our guest today is Peggy Reis, who is the current president of the Anderson Township Trustees. And so we welcome you to the show. And Peggy, we welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Dick.
Glad you're here. I'm looking forward to our conversation because I understand you just recently have been very much a part of a new program called History to Schools.
Yes.
Program, which is one that has been a kind of a partnership between Anderson Township and the Historical Society and Forest Hill School District. Tell us about that. How did that all get started?
Well, it's a pleasure to have such a fun topic for the show today, because quite often when we're here we're so serious, which is appropriate. But this is something new and it's exciting. And it really got started quite some time ago. I would say well over a year ago, when one of my staff members received a call from a teacher in one of the elementary schools, and her request was, could Mrs. Rice come into the second grades and teach local history? Now, I found that a little bit startling, since I didn't feel qualified as a teacher at all, although anyone who knows me well knows that history is one of my passions. I first became interested in our local history during our bicentennial in 1993, and of course we have some great legacies from that. And then when the Anderson Center was being built, it was I who suggested that maybe that room over there in the corner could be a history room instead of storage.
Which was a great suggestion,
right,
by the way, yes.
Right. So I kept rubbing out storage and putting in history. And of course, our wonderful Anderson Township Historical Society, that is their purpose for being as well, is local history. But it's difficult to turn down a request, especially when you feel that there is a need there for our history to be understood. But the more I thought about it, I thought, this is a big, important subject, and I'm not certain that that's the way to go about it. So I contacted a member of the Historical Society, and I said, what do you think about this? And she said, well, I don't think it should be handled haphazardly. And by that she meant that where in their curriculum does local history fit? What is the big picture here? Do we need to bring it down to a 7-year-old level so that the right message is out there? So the more we talked about it, the more we realized that the thing to do was to have a meeting with the teachers and suggest that a field trip to Anderson Center, which would include the history room, would be the way to do it. Well, that presented a problem because the second grade had not had a field trip, and can't even remember when. It just wasn't practical for them to do so. So we started meetings, with the teachers and with the Historical Society. And our first thought was that we would just give them some tools to take into the classroom that would be appropriate and would aid them in their teaching. But that changed completely when Dr. Jackson, Dallas Jackson, who's a school superintendent, talked to the principals of the schools, and it was decided that indeed a field trip would be practical and doable. Well, that was really exciting news.
Oh, yeah.
So then our task was to set out and plan the field trip. And one of the difficulties was that we needed to set aside 6 mornings in this center to do exclusively that, because there are 6 elementary schools.
Oh, that's right.
That's a lot of 7-year-olds.
Yeah, that sure is.
That's a lot. And but we did that, and each day, each of the 6 days, we had somewhere between 100 and 125 second graders, in their class. And that's is an unmanageable amount to deal with as a group.
Yes.
So we broke them into 5 smaller groups, and then there was either a staff member or I was there as a trustee to take them along to these stations, and we set up stations. And The first thing that they learned was a program that we called Township 101. Township 101 was originally supposed to be taught to residents who were interested in learning more about their government. And it had some limited success, but it had all the right information in it, but our challenge was to bring it down to the second grade level. And so even though we had the PowerPoint, we had to sort of, I don't know what the phrase is, sort of inject something that would catch their attention. Mm-hmm. So we had SpongeBob in there, you know. we had the superheroes and the cartoon characters, and of course they loved that. So the first station was for them to go into the boardroom for the trustees, and they all sat on the floor, and we had the PowerPoint going with the cartoons, and I told them a little bit about what a trustee does, and each of the departments got up and did their thing, and they really enjoyed it. And it's a subject that you can imagine would have bored them to sobs ordinarily. Yeah. But because we took it down to their level, it was great. And, you know, in Public Works, and then, you know, the police and the firefighters, and, you know, they were all doing their thing. So that was the start to the day. And then these small groups moved around the building and, you know, into the various things we were trying to teach them.
Now, did each class spend a whole day?
They arrived at 10 o'clock, and I believe they needed to be back on their buses at 2.
Oh, okay. So
it was a good portion of the day.
Yeah.
Plus, with maybe a half hour for their lunch.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, we were very lucky with the weather because one of the stations was a nature walk around the lake, but I'll get to that in a minute. It's always better if, with children so young and they've got all this energy, if you can take them outside for lunch, let them burn off some steam and, you know, burn off their energy. So after they had their Township 101 class, one of the stations was to take them into the history room. And the historical docents were there to teach them. And it was, what I thought was so interesting about the approach to history was it was about, they were learning about children in historical times, children that they could relate to. And so they had, part of the history room was set up with school desks and the old readers and chalkboards.
Oh,
and they, you know, they learned that there was a one-room classroom, and they, you know, it took them back in time. Yeah, and, you know.
But again, you know, you're relating to a level, their level of what they could absorb, rather than, because I think sometimes history could be much more exciting when you talk about people rather than necessarily just dates and places, I think, and especially for children. So what a great approach you all took to it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I really think they got the sense of a one-room classroom and how cold it might have been, and there weren't any drinking fountains, and you had your bucket if you needed a drink of water, and it was difficult for them to get the concept that really this was their reader. This little McGuffey's was their reader, and that's what they had, and that's how they learned. And they didn't go to the library and get dozens and dozens of books. And of course, the other part was that they got to see some of the artifacts that are on display there. And I know one little boy, there was a picture of George Washington in the time frame. And I said, well, did you know that George Washington owned 1,000 acres in Anderson Township? And he said, No, I didn't. I didn't. So you're so right when you say if you can relate it to people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Plus, they remember. I think they'll remember things like that.
Right. So one of the things, as I said, when we were lucky about the weather, was when they wrote their thank you notes, it became crystal clear that the nature walk was a big success. You can imagine.
Oh, sure.
And we're quite fortunate because we do have a botanist on our staff, Suzanne Klingman. And so she was able to explain to them, take them to the lake and say, this is a natural habitat. This is one we created. We created the habitat, but then the animals came. So she took them around the lake and she showed them the trees and all the animals that were there. Actually, she was able to document 29 species of birds.
Oh my gosh!
On
Really?
this walk. I know.
Heavens.
It's just amazing. And of course, one of the things to tie back into the history was that we have our own buckeye grove out there. And it was early May, and so that was one of the trees that had started to bloom, and she showed them the buckeyes and told them that it was our state tree. And they just loved every part of that. I mean, she caught tadpoles for them. And
Oh my gosh!
I know,
Yeah.
I know. And one little boy said, "Oh," he said, "you know what?" He said, "I've seen the ducks, but I didn't get to see the turtle." He said, "Do you think I could come back and see the turtle?" She said, "This is your building, and you can just come back and visit this lake anytime you want." So that was a wonderful message for the
sure.
children to know
yeah.
that, you know,
They could
it belonged
come,
to
and
them.
You know, there's probably a lot of adults that haven't even done that.
Well, my hope is that the children will go home and tell the adults.
Well, because
you know?
it's true. Because really, I'll bet there are a lot of adults that probably did not realize what that represents out there.
Right.
You know, I mean, they probably have no idea that's more than just a lake or a pond, so to speak.
It's a lot of fun. You should
it's-
walk around. And sometimes when you're walking around the trail, a rock will start chirping at you. It's full of surprises out there.
Oh, that's terrific, then.
I can tell you, it
Yeah.
was terrific. And then there was another historical presentation by a society member. It was a PowerPoint, but once again, it talked about families and families with children. And how did they get here? Well, they built flatboats. What's a flatboat? And they had a model of a flatboat to show the children and how that would travel down the river and probably be used after it had served its purpose for the wood in another way. But they were just fascinated by the fact, and it focused on two particular Anderson families, the Clarks and the Wolfangles. But they were able to see how a family started out on such an arduous and difficult journey, often in the middle of winter, because they needed to get the crops in the ground for spring. I mean,
yeah.
it was fascinating, and they just ate it up with a spoon. And they loved the flatboat, and that you had to live on the flatboat until you reached Anderson Township. It was quite something.
It really is. That's amazing. Well, because because of the river, that's how a lot of people got to this area and settled this area. You know, I think that just the idea that I think there isn't a lot of history, local history taught anymore in schools, and I think, and especially the approach you all took to it, really made it real for them. I think that's the key. I mean, they're not just getting it out of a book and reading it out of a book, that they're really able to relate to it. I commend you for that. I think that's a terrific program.
Well, we tried to carry the then and now theme all through it so that they could relate to the then, but also sort of apply it to now.
Right.
I mean, even the tools and the artifacts that they saw in the history room were just amazing. I mean, there are things in there they've never seen before. They've never seen a telephone with a dial on it.
Oh, no.
But, I mean, what is that for?
Yeah.
You know. So it's kind of fun to see how they respond, and It was a busy morning, and we had our hands full, but it worked very smoothly, and we, as leaders, we had a sign, and group A, B, C, D, and E. Okay, so each child knew that they had to stay in their group, and stay behind the leader, and then it was just great because sometimes they would start chattering and dee, and we had two things we would do. This, which means pipe down, and they knew that too. And then they'd all start that. So there was some control mechanisms for all of us.
Well, because that's to keep them focused. I'm sure because at that age their focus is short anyway, and to keep them focused because it's a pretty long period of time. But you broke it up enough,
right,
to keep them interested because they were moving. I think if they were sitting in one place, it would never work. Never work.
Never would have worked. Another station was outside, but we had a patrol car there with an officer from the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, and a fire engine, and a dump truck.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, they love that.
Oh yeah.
They love that,
Yeah.
and so the officers were able to teach them about safety and about the equipment, and they love the equipment, and the dump truck especially they seem to like quite a bit. But I know at one point there was a break in the action, and so one of the firefighters decided he would show one of the little boys how they would take an EKG for the heart with this particular machine. So they took this little boy's EKG, and he looked at it, and he got a printout of it. Well, he was proud of that. I've got the printout, So, but he said, well, now you go home and show that to your mom. And he said, well, what will I tell her it is? What does it mean? And he said, well, tell her it means you're alive and well and you need to clean your room. so much fun.
Let me take just a little break here to remind everybody that you're watching Trustee Talk, and we are talking today with Peggy Reis, who is president of the Anderson Township Trustees, about a very exciting program, and it's a new program, isn't it? Because
yes,
it's
brand
the
new.
First time. Called the New History for Schools program. So that's, when I hear you talk about it, that's quite an undertaking that you all took on
right.
to make this happen.
Right. Yeah, it took quite a bit of organization. But you mentioned something before, Dick, about the teachers, and I have a great deal of admiration and actually a new respect for what they do and try to do in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Because
yes.
when we first started looking at their state curriculum and what the state requires of them as teachers, no wonder they were pleading for a little bit of help, because it's very rigid.
Yes.
And they are expected to fulfill a very strict set of requirements.
Yes, they are.
And so I was pleased to know that this program for them was helpful, and they're able to take it back and continue teaching and building on it in the classroom. So even though it was a wonderful morning for these children, it was the basis for what they needed to know.
Well, yeah, and I think that now, will you repeat that? Are you going to repeat this again?
It was very ambitious.
Yeah, it sure was. I can tell.
I would like to make it an ongoing, once a year field trip for the second graders. And I think that, we learned a lot, and we'll try. We'll do our best. But there was another thing that happened, and I was very fearful that this particular segment would be boring to them. But from the thank you notes and the response that came back, it was anything but. And it was an interaction segment with township maps. Oh. And our planners taught them. And they learned what an aerial map was, what the different types of maps do. And they learned about the scale. they actually saw each class saw their particular school from an aerial, and 20 years ago and what it looks like now. So they were able to totally relate to that. And the fun thing is that this particular segment had so many aspects to it. It taught them about maps. It taught them about the geography of their township. And then they got to find their house on the map and put a gold star where they lived.
How great.
So it really
Yeah.
opened them up to the total concept of, I live in a township, you know. It was fun. It was
That's
fun. They
terrific, yeah.
they liked it a lot.
I mean, and you know, they really did think through. I mean, you covered a lot of ground in a very short time. When you think about it, I mean, that's a lot.
I think each session was about, let me think about this. It was either 30 or 40 minutes. It was enough time to give them a good deal of information, but not too much.
Yeah.
And then time to move on.
Yeah.
So that really worked. And then, so it worked out very well. And then at the very end of the day, we took them into the theater. And it was wonderful that we had just had Arbor Day. So we taught them about trees, the importance of trees, and they got that. I mean, they really did. About clean air and oxygen and shade, and they got it. And then we were able to give them a tree.
Oh, how terrific.
And teach them how to plant it and protect it so Dad doesn't run over it with the lawnmower, or, you know, whatever. And water it and, you know, keep it safe. And they really did, they liked that quite a bit. And that sort of wrapped up the day for them, and it was something that they could take home. And speak of takeaways and things to take home, the Historical Society did just a marvelous thing. They put together a little challenge for them, which was a homework assignment.
Oh.
Yeah, and so then and now in Anderson Township. And so they each got to take this home, and they got to look at all the historical buildings that are in the township. And if their parents would take them, let's go around and see these historical buildings for ourselves. So it was terrific.
I like that a lot. I mean, that, of course, that gets the parents involved also.
Exactly. And then the other thing that they got was, where is it? I'm going to show it to you because it's so cute. Look at this. Anderson Township Bicentennial Coloring Book.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, this was a legacy. It's sort of a scaled down version, but it shows the children in the pioneer days and what they did, their activities, and how they had to help plant.
That's terrific. Who put that together?
Well, it was originally commissioned, as I said, in 1993 when we were celebrating the bicentennial. And so it teaches them history, and it teaches them pioneer ways. And I just thought that was a great handout
It is
for
a great
them.
handout.
So
yeah.
they had something to take home with them as well.
I would love to have been on the end at home, because I got to believe they went home with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of knowledge, and probably probably taught their parents a few things about Anderson Township they didn't know about before.
Well, from a trustee point of view, I have to admit that was one of my personal hopes and ambitions for this, to get the families engaged in the community, in this building, in Anderson Center. Come to the building, enjoy it. Come to the history room, enjoy that. And so I know one father did come back with his little boy, and because he just says, "Oh, Dad." But I mean, when they left, you could just. One little girl was hanging out the school bus window, and she was saying, thanks for an amazing day. It was
Well, that
just
had
great.
to make you feel good, and you know, I think that that one take-home thing,
Mm-hmm.
you would get the parents to go out and get them involved, like you said, and going out and look at some of the historic landmarks in the Anderson area. I mean, that's got to be terrific, and it's another wonderful opportunity for the children and the parents to
To do
bond
something
and
together.
do something together.
Right.
That's also educational at the same time.
Right. Now, we did do, because we want some feedback on this, we did give a questionnaire to the teachers so that they could give us comments and feedback on, you know, each segment, and was it too long? Was it at the appropriate level? All sorts of questions that, you know, will help us,
Did you get
figure
some
out.
Good, did you get some good feedback?
Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't actually seen that part of it yet, but I do know, I brought some, I'll tell you what I did bring. The probably the best measure of whether a program, this or any other one, was a success
Yes.
is the feedback. So I did bring some notes from the children,
Oh,
which you
great.
might like to. And this one says, "Thank you for the super duper experience of the Anderson Center. My favorite part was when we went outside and looked at the pond and saw the buckeyes, and when you showed us the tadpole you had caught. I also liked when we saw the maps. On every map, I found my house."
That's
So
terrific.
it's so dear. I mean, you know, it says, "Thank you for the great field trip experience. My favorite was when we got to experience a one-room schoolhouse. I got to read the McGuffey book, and I got to write a word on the small board." It just goes on and on,
Oh, that's,
but,
well,
but it's just adorable.
That's the reward right there.
Yeah,
It worked.
it did
It
work.
worked. Well,
It did work.
congratulations.
Thank
You
you.
know, I mean, I commend you and all of those that were involved in that process, because that's a great way for children to learn. I think just to be able to go out and see and do and touch, and you did a great job. I hope you do it again.
Well, it's our dream to keep it going and to make it a part of the children in their curriculum, and it was a pleasure to do it.
Well, it was a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you.
And really, I'm excited. I almost want to go on the trip myself. Thanks for coming in and joining us today.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure seeing you, and I hope you continue that program, because I think that's an excellent
Thanks, Dick.
Excellent program. We thank you all for being with us, joining us for Trustee Talk today, and making us part of your day. We hope that the rest of your day will be pleasant and productive. I'm Dick Murgatroyd, and on behalf of our producer, and I think at one point our director, Nikki, and now our director, Andy, who I think is in there, we invite you to join us for our next edition of Trustee Talk here on ACTV. Have a great day. Thank you.